starting well at all. Must be the size of my one. Namaste. Somehow I knew you would laugh and you didn't disappoint. I was so glad.
Why are you laughing?
You had your eyes closed, you don't know.
That's true. I don't.
That's good, it's better that way. It's Miriam and my little joke. So is this gospel came around, and it must have come around 3 years ago. It did, but I don't remember it coming around. And it doesn't matter, but I remembered it coming around. This gospel is probably the beginning of the end at my first church, which ran concurrently. I was called to my first church in 1999, November of 1999-ish. It was kind of a bizarre thing, kind of eased into it, and then started the Universal Anglican Church in 2003, in August 9th of 2003, started the predecessor of this group on Leap Day of 2004, was the first service, which was a Sunday that year. And because that way I figured I could either say that, now we're about to be 3 years old, or if I liked it better, I could just say we were about to be 12 years old, how people, are born on Leap Day do that, But read this gospel, and the way we did liturgy planning in that first church was that some families signed up to plan for the month. And then I went to their house and we planned for the month. And usually we started with the gospel that was for the Sunday of that week. And we had this collection of books that I carried around in a suitcase on wheels. Honest to God. And we picked the other readings usually from alternative sources. Sometimes we used 2 of the prescribed readings, but usually stuck to the gospel. And they loved themes, which is why I hate themes. Because some of the themes they chose, like trying to get stuff to fit, it was just like, oh my God. It wasn't like you looked at the gospel and said, let's come up with a theme for a week. Oh no. We were going to come up for a theme for the month and then take a crowbar and jam those in, whether they were going to fit or not. So we read these readings. In those days I read the gospel, and our musician, who had a doctorate or was perpetually struggling to finish her doctorate at Marquette in radical feminist man-hating theology, announced, and those readings are manure. And the community was such that they were going to let her say that. And it's sort of like, what do you say after that as you're preaching? Of course, they thought she shouldn't have said that, but they were so non-confrontational. If I had said anything about her saying that to her, they wouldn't have supported me in that either. Reflecting the fact that the community was really, manure. And what her objection was, I've never been able to figure out. And it would have been a wonderful opportunity to talk about some of these superstitious beliefs that come to the fore in this gospel reading. Because this bit about, and no offense intended to people who are Jewish and still would find this kind of problematic, but there were some people who Pontius Pilate had killed, and they were practicing the Jewish sacrificial system, so they had made offerings to God. And when Pilate killed them, he actually mingled the blood from these people he killed with the blood from their sacrificial animals, which was ritually, to Jewish thought, horrific. I mean, there was nothing more obscene that he could have done in killing them. And it was so obscene that to Jewish thought, there was some question about whether God would have accepted them. Particularly since Jewish thought at that point had started to evolve to thinking about maybe there might be an afterlife. That distinction between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because the Pharisees thought there was an afterlife, and the Sadducees didn't, which is why they were sad, you see. And so,
Don't encourage him.
but there was this,
You see?
there was this, from our perspective, at face value, really kind of strange idea that what other people did had an impact on what God thought of you. Even what they did to you after you were dead. And some of what Jesus is trying to address here is that kind of thinking. You know, and these people who were unfortunate enough to die when a tower fell on them. And yet, we still kind of think those things. There's still, when you hear about particularly tragic deaths, we think, man, what did they have to do to have to die that way? You know, suppose, for example, and I'm just making this up, but I'm sure it's happened, you know, people are standing outside an orphanage and the building collapses on them. It's like, holy cow, what did they have to do to have that happen? You know, and we get into really this superstitious thinking that somehow, it's not bad enough that you die, but somehow that the way that you die reflects what God thinks of you. And so, it's paired with a story relating to agriculture that would have made a whole lot of sense to an agricultural culture, but doesn't make a whole lot of sense to those of us living in the city. In the lovely metropolis of Wausau, putting manure around a tree is probably really exciting. It's probably something they're getting ready to do, probably with a ritual, maybe a procession in a couple of months. And to count, we have been to the manure capital.
Oh, totally.
And so to them it made great, this thing that they were objected to at my first church, or at least the man-hating feminist. I often thought, you know, her poor husband, nicest guy in the
Oh
world.
my gosh, she actually got one?
Oh, she did. Yeah, I'm sure.
She didn't like the word manure and
I don't know if it was the manure or exactly what it was that made the whole thing bad. But it wasn't that she was offended by manure.
I would have thought that her reaction was due to it being bullshit about that. That guy must have had a shitty life because he really died terribly. When I first heard that, to me, she's saying, what a bunch of crap.
Maybe, but then she didn't want to talk about it and explore it. I mean, I think it's still something that's worth exploring. That was one characteristic that community had, is they never wanted to explore the parallels in ancient beliefs where we today go with, there's some beliefs that people hold a lot contemporarily that are equally as superstitious. And you know, they certainly, you may be right, they certainly didn't like their sacred cows explored. For example, it was absolutely essential that she would castrate all of our music for our protection, so that any reference to a male be expunged from our hymns. In fact, they weren't
Are we
hymns.
talking about this?
Yeah, they weren't hymns. They weren't hers either, but they were songs. But the weakness was, so you changed the traditional Lord's Prayer, and the way you started it then was Our Father, Mother. But it doesn't fix it, because it just makes sure that you add the problem that's going in the other direction. Instead of saying, Our God, who art in heaven, which would take care of the gender bias problem altogether. But the real interest was in that you assert a feminine spirituality, which is fine. You take away the masculine-based spirituality, which is not fine, because you just create the problem facing the other direction. And when that was pointed out, not only by me, but by my predecessor, you know, we got called names and all kinds of stuff, which is fine. But you don't, what you really need to do, if you're going to be honest then, is you need to say, I'm not really interested here in helping people come to an image of God that isn't based in gender. What I'm interested in is attacking those lousy bastards who, for generations, have reflected the gender bias that's inherent in the culture. And I'm going to make it even. And that's not really a healthy way to move on. Now, if you choose to do that, it's okay, but I think you need to acknowledge this is what we're doing.
But is that right intention?
No, it's not right intention.
Right.
And that's where right intention becomes important. Because inevitably, communities that do that have run across an abusive man. That's fine. I mean, it's not fine that you can run across an abusive man. It's fine to want to fix it. But there's just as many abusive females out there. There's just as many Joan Crawford mommies out there. And what these folks need to be aware of is that while they're trying to resolve their own issues, they need to be sensitive to those people who grew up with abusive females. And so, why wouldn't you want to, with right intent, then fix it all together? Fix it for both groups. Offer an image of God that freed people from being attached to, and it might have been, an uncle or an aunt or whomever. Just go to the reality that most people today are saying that God is gender neutral. And at the same time, you do other kind of cool, unintentional things by helping folks who really struggle with gender identity altogether by taking that as a question out of, taking that question out of the mix. And then you don't even have to go and castrate or neuter music at all. Because if you look at sacred music, it's got male and female components to it. And you can just leave it alone. And you can write new music that's gender neutral. And you can reflect the diversity that's inherent in all of life. I think one of the things that was really beautiful about that perspective that Gil Franzl advanced in the second reading is that you can have both the destination being important and the journey being important. Transformation seldom occurs in a 50-yard dash. Sometimes it does, but especially when we get a little older, we find that the things that need to be transformed are rooted in these years and years of experience and practice that we've had. And they aren't going to change overnight. And they're not going to change in a 5-minute little course or, those people that make those little pamphlets. Here, read this little pamphlet and your life will change. I promise you it won't. And so there's things to be learned along the way, and there's things to be learned in arriving at the destination. If somebody believes that the Galileans whose blood was mingled with the blood of the animals they sacrificed were somehow doomed and God didn't love them anymore, you're not going to be able to hand them a tract and get them to feel better about it. You're going to have to maybe get them to read something like that opening prayer that we do that works on them internally, and then maybe show them some other things that might get them to question these beliefs that they've held. Maybe expose them to some people who have some different perspectives. And maybe most of all, get them to be kind and patient with themselves. You know that a couple of weeks ago, Aaron and I went to see Amy Grant and Stephen Curtis Chapman in DeKalb, the manure capital of Northern Illinois. And you may not know that one of the things that happened with Stephen Curtis Chapman and his wife is they got involved in adopting children from China. And the third child they adopt was tragically killed in an accident when the family was out in the front yard and his teenage son was backing the car out and the daughter ran behind the car. And he hit the little girl and she was killed. And I was saying to Aaron on the way here, have been listening during the week to some of his music, and some of the love songs he wrote to his wife said, earlier in their marriage, it said, I'll be with you through everything and stand with you no matter what. And I said to her, I somehow suspect that he didn't quite know how deep some of the valleys he would be standing with her through would be. And we don't know that. And But particularly in his life, boy, you talk about right intent. And sometimes even our best intention gets put to a test that is frankly more than any human being could possibly hope to carry. And I think sometimes people rise to the task, and others sadly can't. And it's not a sign really of a personal defect or anything like that. It's just a question of, there are some loads that are more than we can carry. And all we can do is, right intent doesn't mean perfection. It's a question of doing the best we can. And maybe holding those beliefs loosely enough that when we find we can't do what we intended to do, we handle that with the intent to make the best of what comes next as well.